My husband stood in the center of that ballroom, wearing a suit I paid for, and poured vintage red wine over my shoes just to hear his mistress laugh. He called me a leech in front of the city's elite, while his mother, who is only alive today because I gave her my own kidney, watched with a smirk. He thinks he's the king of this empire, but he forgot that I'm the one who laid every brick. He wants to see me crawl? He's about to find out that I'm the one holding his leash. Let me tell you how it all began. The crystal chandeliers of the Fairmont, San Francisco, hung like frozen tears over the city's elite, their light reflecting off the silverware and the hollow smiles of people who had too much money and too little soul. This was Julian's night, the 10th anniversary of the tech construction empire we built from a dusty garage in Palo Alto. He stood there, the golden boy of California's infrastructure, holding a glass of a 2012 Screaming Eagle Cabernet that cost more than a teacher's monthly salary. I stood by his side, my back straight, my Chanel dress tailored to a perfection that hid the exhaustion of a woman who had spent 72 hours straight fixing his latest legal blunder. I expected a thank you. I expected a toast to our partnership. Instead, Julian turned to me, his eyes glazed with the kind of ego that only comes to men who believe their own lies. The ballroom went silent as he tilted his hand. The deep, blood-red wine cascaded in a slow-motion nightmare, drenching the cream-colored silk of my shoes, the last gift my father gave me before he passed. The liquid soaked into the fabric, a spreading stain that looked like a fresh wound. Isabella, a 24-year-old architect whose only notable design was the one she used to crawl into my husband's bed, let out a sharp, bird-like giggle. Julian didn't flinch. He leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive oak and cheap betrayal. "You're looking a bit dull tonight, Eleanor," he whispered, loud enough for the nearby city council members to hear. "The investors want a trophy, not a librarian. Why don't you go find a cloth and make yourself useful? You've been leeching off my success for years. The least you can do is not ruin the aesthetic of my party with that sour face." A ripple of hushed gasps and stifled laughter moved through the crowd like a virus. I felt the heat rise to my neck, but I didn't move. I didn't cry. My eyes drifted to Martha, my mother-in-law, who was draped in pearls I had bought her for her 65th birthday. She was sipping her own drink, her expression one of pure, unadulterated coldness. "Julian is right, dear," Martha added, her voice cutting through the air with a practiced cruelty. "You've always been so heavy, like a weight around his neck. We've been very patient with your lack of charm, but tonight is about brilliance. And you, Eleanor, are simply a shadow. Perhaps you should head home. I'm sure there are some dishes that need scrubbing to remind you of where you actually belong." As she spoke, I saw the glint of a smartphone lens. Serena, Julian's younger sister, was standing 3 feet away, her face illuminated by the glow of a TikTok live stream. She was narrating the humiliation in real time to her 50,000 followers, a smirk playing on her lips. "Check it out, guys," Serena whispered into her mic, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "The queen just got dethroned by a glass of red. Look at her shoes. Tragic. I guess some people just aren't meant for the spotlight." The comments on her screen were flying by, vicious, mocking, and dehumanizing. I stood there, the center of a digital and physical circus, and for a fleeting moment, a sharp, phantom pain flared in my lower back, right where the surgical scar sat. 5 years ago, I lay on an operating table in a sterile room at Stanford Medical, terrified but determined. Martha was dying. Her kidneys were failing, and the wait list was a death sentence. Without a second thought, I gave her mine. I gave her a piece of my own body so that Julian wouldn't have to bury his mother. I remembered the way she held my hand then, sobbing, calling me her angel, promising that I would always be her daughter. Now she stood there, using the very life I gave back to her to breathe out insults. She looked at me not with gratitude, but with the resentment of a woman who hated being beholden to someone she considered beneath her. She wanted to erase the debt by erasing me. I looked at Julian one last time. He was already turning back to Isabella, his hand resting possessively on her waist, acting as if I had already ceased to exist. He thought he was the architect of this life. He thought his name on the building meant he owned the foundation. He forgot that while he was out playing visionary at Napa Valley Retreats, I was the one filing the patents, securing the ironclad contracts, and shielding his company from the predatory lawsuits that would have buried him years ago. I was the silent engine, and he was just the hood ornament. He truly believed he could hurl me aside like a piece of scrap metal now that he had reached the top. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a scene. I simply turned on my heel, the wet silk of my shoe making a faint, squelching sound on the polished marble. Each step felt heavier than the last, but my mind was becoming terrifyingly clear. I walked through the towering oak doors of the ballroom, past the valet who looked at my stained feet with pity, and climbed into the back of my car. The silence of the vehicle was a sanctuary. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and opened a secure cloud folder labeled The Verdict. I scrolled past the offshore account records, past the evidence of Julian's embezzlement, and stopped at the Delaware Shell Company filings. With a single tap, I activated the emergency debt recall. In exactly 48 hours, every bank loan Julian had personally guaranteed, loans backed by my private trust, would be frozen. He wanted me to crawl? He wanted to see me ruined? He had no idea that the leech he just insulted was the only thing keeping his entire world from collapsing into the dirt. I took off my ruined shoes and tossed them into the trash bin by the curb as we drove away. The red stain on the silk was temporary. The stain I was about to leave on his life would be permanent. If you've ever given your all to someone only to have them throw it back in your face, hit like and leave a comment below. I want to hear your stories of resilience. Let's show them they can't break us. The rain began to streak against the window of the town car as it glided toward our estate in Atherton, blurring the neon lights of San Francisco into a smear of cold, indifferent color. I sat in the darkness of the back seat, my bare feet tucked under me, avoiding the sight of the ruined Chanel silk discarded on the floor mat. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the digital numbers of my phone screen, my hand kept drifting, almost reflexively, to the left side of my waist. Through the thin fabric of my dress, I could feel it. A jagged, raised line of silver tissue, the physical receipt of a debt that Julian and his family had chosen to forget. 5 years ago, the air in our lives hadn't been filled with the scent of vintage wine and expensive perfume. It smelled like antiseptic, fear, and the slow, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in that sterile hospital room at Stanford. I could still see Martha, her face a grayish-yellow hue, her once vibrant eyes sunken and clouded with the fog of end-stage renal failure. She was a ghost of a woman, fading away before our eyes. Julian had been a wreck back then. Not the arrogant tycoon who just humiliated me, but a terrified boy watching his mother slip away. I remember him kneeling by my side in the hospital cafeteria, his hands trembling as he gripped mine. "Eleanor, the doctors say the wait list is 3 years," he had whispered, his voice breaking. "She doesn't have 3 months. I can't lose her. She's all I have left of my father." I didn't hesitate. To me, being a family meant you didn't keep score. You gave what was needed, especially when the stakes were life and death. I was a perfect match, a 1 in a million stroke of luck, or so the doctor said. To me, it felt like destiny. I believed in the American dream my immigrant parents had whispered about, that if you work hard, if you are loyal, and if you protect your own, the universe rewards you with a life of peace and security. I remembered the morning of the surgery. Martha had reached out from her gurney, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. She pulled me close, her eyes wet with tears. "You're not just my daughter-in-law anymore, Eleanor," she had rasped. "You're my savior. You're the daughter of my heart. As long as I draw breath, you will always have a place at my table." My home is your home. My son's success is your success. We are one blood now. Those words had been my anchor through the months of grueling recovery. When the phantom pains shot through my side, when the fatigue made it hard to even stand, I told myself it was worth it. I had saved a life. I had secured our family's foundation. But the surgery was only part of the sacrifice. While Julian spent his days playing the role of the charismatic CEO, networking at golf courses and gala dinners, I was the one in the trenches. I remember the late nights in our home office, my surgical site still tender, as I redrafted the patent applications for the Aegis framework, the very technology that made Julian a billionaire. He didn't understand the legal nuances of the Delaware filings. He didn't have the patience for the intricate risk assessments required for government contracts. "Just make it happen, Elle," he'd say, kissing my forehead before heading out to a business mixer that usually ended at 2 a.m. "You're the brains, I'm the face. We're a team, right?" I believed him. I poured my soul into his shadow, believing that by lifting him up, I was building a fortress for our future. I watched him grow more polished, his suits getting more expensive, his ego expanding until there was no room left for the woman who had literally bled for his mother and his career. Slowly, the angel became the burden. Once Martha got her strength back, once my kidney started filtering the bitterness out of her system, she stopped looking at me with gratitude. She started looking at me with resentment. Every time I coughed, every time I needed to rest, I was a reminder of her weakness. I was the witness to the time she had been broken and dependent. And for a woman like Martha, who valued power above all else, a witness is just a liability that needs to be removed. The car slowed as we pulled into the gated driveway of our mansion. The massive pillars of the house stood like cold sentinels in the rain. This was the house I had designed. These were the gardens I had nurtured. And yet, as I looked at the dark windows, I realized I was a stranger in my own life. The Julian who cried in the cafeteria was dead. The Martha who promised me a place at her table was a lie. They had taken my health, my youth, and my intellectual labor, and now they were trying to take my dignity. They thought they had used me until I was empty, like a lemon squeezed of its juice and ready for the trash. I stepped out of the car, my bare feet hitting the cold, wet pavement. The pain in my side gave one final sharp throb, as if to remind me why I was doing this. "You wanted one blood, Martha," I whispered into the wind, my voice devoid of the warmth it once held. "Well, you got it. But you forgot that blood doesn't just sustain life. It also carries the scent of the kill." I walked into the foyer, the marble floors cold against my skin. Upstairs, I could hear the faint sound of music. Julian was likely already home, celebrating his triumph with a drink, probably calling Isabella to brag about how he'd finally put me in my place. He thought tonight was the end of Eleanor, the quiet wife. He had no idea it was the birth of Eleanor, the architect of his ruin. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a devastating earthquake. I sat in my darkened office, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. Julian hadn't come home. He was likely in a high-end hotel suite in Nob Hill, toasting his victory with Isabella, laughing about the woman he had left standing barefoot in the rain. For months, I had sensed the shift, the subtle red flags that I, in my naive loyalty, had tried to explain away. It started with Julian changing the passcode on his tablet, claiming corporate security. Then came the sudden weekend consultations in Carmel, and the late-night hushed phone calls he'd take on the balcony. I had felt the cracks forming, but I never imagined the rot went this deep. I opened Instagram, my thumb hovering over the search bar. I didn't follow Isabella. I didn't need to. But Serena's profile was a public gallery of our family's perfection. I scrolled past the live stream of the gala, the comments still buzzing with the drama of the wine-soaked shoes. Then, I saw it. A new post from an hour ago. It was a selfie of Serena and Isabella, tucked into a VIP booth at an after-hours club. They were both beaming, their faces flushed with expensive champagne. But my breath hitched, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis when I looked at Isabella's neckline. Pinned to the lapel of her blazer was a piece of jewelry I knew better than my own reflection. It was an Art Deco emerald brooch, the stones a deep, haunting forest green, surrounded by a delicate web of platinum and diamonds. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the only thing I had left of my mother, a woman who had immigrated to this country with nothing but that brooch sewn into the lining of her coat. She had worked 3 jobs, scrubbing floors in the very buildings Julian now owned, just to ensure that die Vut, her legacy, would one day belong to me. "Julian, it's too much," I remembered saying to him on our 5th anniversary when I brought it out of the safe. "It's the only thing that connects me to her." He had smiled then, that charming, crooked smile that I once mistook for love, and promised to keep it in the family vault for extra security. I felt a coldness wash over me that was sharper than any surgical blade. My mother had saved that brooch through the Great Depression and through her own illness, intending it for my daughter, or as a final safety net for my future. And there it was, pinned to the chest of a woman who didn't even know my mother's name. But the real knife to the heart came from the caption Serena had written under the photo. "Celebrating the new era! Huge thanks to Mom for giving Isabella the proper welcome into the family. The Queen Mother knows exactly who deserves the crown jewels. Hashtag family first, hashtag out with the old." Mom. Martha. Martha hadn't just stood by while Julian humiliated me. She had actively participated in the theft. She had gone into the vault, a vault I had given her access to in case of an emergency, and handed my mother's soul to Julian's mistress. It was a calculated move to strip me of my history, to tell me that I owned nothing, not even my memories. I leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. The physical pain from my surgery 5 years ago was nothing compared to this. I had given Martha the ability to live, and she had used that life to help her son rob me of my mother's ghost. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop. In the high-stakes world of California real estate and tech, the one who loses their temper loses the deal. And I was done making bad deals with the Miller family. I realized then that Julian and Martha saw me as an empty shell. To them, I was just a utility, a kidney, a legal mind, a quiet wife. They thought that by taking the brooch, they had taken my power. They didn't realize that they had just given me the one thing I was missing: total, cold-blooded clarity. Julian thought he was playing a game of checkers, moving pieces for immediate gratification. He didn't realize I had been playing a decades-long game of chess. He thought he was the king, but I was the one who had built the board, the pieces, and the very room we were sitting in. I pulled a hidden ledger from the bottom drawer of my desk. It contained the login credentials for the Aegis Trust, the one I had quietly established years ago when I first noticed Julian's creative accounting. I looked at the digital certificate for the core technology patents. "You want to play with legacies, Julian?" I whispered, my voice a low, dangerous hum. "Fine. Let's see how you handle yours turning to ash." I picked up the phone and made a single call to a private investigator I had retained weeks ago. "It's time," I said. "I need the high-resolution photos of Isabella at the club tonight, and I need a jeweler who can work fast. I have a very special gift to return to my mother-in-law." The hunt was no longer a defensive one. I was no longer the victim. As I stared at the green fire of the emerald on my screen, I knew that the next time Martha touched that brooch, it would be the beginning of the end for everything she held dear. The morning sun began to creep over the manicured hedges of our Atherton estate, casting long, mocking shadows across the marble floors. I hadn't slept. While Julian was presumably recovering from his night of debauchery in a penthouse suite, I was immersed in the glowing blue light of 3 different monitors. To the world, and especially to Julian, I was just the wife who handled the boring paperwork. But in the high-stakes ecosystem of Silicon Valley, the one who controls the paperwork controls the oxygen. I watched the cursor blink on a spreadsheet that mapped out Julian's secret life. He thought he was a genius for setting up Mirage Holdings in Delaware. It was a classic move, a shell company designed to siphon off profits from our main firm, Aegis Tech Construction, to fund his new life with Isabella. He had been funneling millions into this vacuum, thinking he was stripping the dead weight of our marriage before the inevitable divorce. What he forgot was that I wasn't just his lawyer. I was the architect of his original corporate charter. Every loophole he thought he was using was a trapdoor I had installed years ago, just in case his ego ever outgrew his ethics. I felt a cold, professional thrill as I navigated through the encrypted layers of his personal server. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent presence he had overlooked for a decade. Julian had become so accustomed to my competence that he mistook it for a natural law, like gravity. He never questioned why the bank loans for his latest multi-million-dollar project in San Jose had been approved so easily. He thought it was his visionary charm. It wasn't. It was my signature as the sole personal guarantor. Without my private trust, the one inherited from my father's disciplined investments, Julian wouldn't have been able to finance a lemonade stand, let alone a skyscraper. I clicked through a series of bank statements and felt my jaw tighten. There it was, a six-figure transfer from our joint contingency fund to a boutique jeweler in Beverly Hills. The emerald brooch. He hadn't just stolen it, he'd used my own money to buy the silence of the vault manager to let him take it. The sheer, lazy audacity of it made me want to scream, but I channeled that heat into a single, decisive keystroke. I drafted a formal Notice of Revocation of Guarantee. By the time the markets opened on Monday, the banks would receive word that I was no longer backing Julian's debts. Without my collateral, his Mirage Holdings wouldn't just be a shell, it would be a noose. Just as I hit save, I heard the heavy front door thud open. Julian was home. I quickly closed my tabs, leaving only a recipe for healthy breakfast frittatas on the screen. I smoothed my hair, adjusted my silk robe, and stepped into the hallway. He looked terrible, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He smelled of stale cigarettes and Isabella's cloying floral perfume. "You're still up?" he muttered, not even looking at me as he tossed his keys onto the console table. He sounded annoyed, as if my mere presence was an inconvenience. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice soft, perfectly calibrated to sound like the librarian he had mocked at the party. "I was worried about you, Julian. After the wine incident, I thought maybe you'd had too much to drink." He let out a sharp, condescending snort. "Don't start with the mothering, Eleanor. It's pathetic. Last night was a celebration, and you ruined the mood with that somber face of yours. Martha was right. You're a drag on the brand." He finally looked at me, his lip curling in a sneer. "By the way, I'm going to need you to sign some transfer papers for the Delaware accounts later this afternoon. Marcus says we need to restructure for the new quarter. Just sign where the sticky notes are. Don't overthink it." "Of course, Julian," I replied, forcing a timid, compliant smile. "I'll look them over as soon as I finish making your coffee." He grunted and headed upstairs, completely oblivious to the fact that he was walking into a minefield. He truly believed I was that simple, that I would just sign away my rights because he told me to. He saw a wife. I saw a mark. He saw a leech. I saw a man who had just handed me the keys to his own prison. I went into the kitchen and started the espresso machine. The steam rose in a cloud, and for a moment, I allowed the mask to slip. My eyes were cold, reflecting the steel of the high-end appliances. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his creditor. I was his lead prosecutor. And soon, I would be his ruin. As the coffee dripped, I took out my phone and sent a quick, encrypted message to my private investigator. "He's back. He wants me to sign the Delaware transfers today. The bait is taken. Proceed with phase 2. I carried the tray upstairs, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet. I was the ghost in his house, the shadow in his bed. and the storm that was about to blow his gilded world apart. He thought he was the king of California, but he was about to find out that the person who built the throne also knows exactly which bolt to unscrew to make it collapse. By the time I reached Martha's guest house, a sprawling 3-bedroom villa on the edge of our estate that I had personally renovated to be ADA compliant for her recovery, the morning fog was beginning to lift. I carried a tray of her favorite almond croissants from a bakery in Palo Alto and a stack of financial restructuring documents. To anyone watching, I was the dutiful daughter-in-law, still nursing the wounds of last night but eager to please. In reality, I was a surgeon about to perform a different kind of operation, one that didn't require a scalpel, just a few well-placed truths. Martha was sitting on her wraparound porch, draped in a cashmere throw that cost more than my first car. She was staring at her reflection in a silver hand mirror, adjusting those pearls again. When she saw me, her expression didn't soften, it sharpened. "Back so soon, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice like sandpaper on silk. "I thought after your little performance at the gala, you'd be hiding in a dark room somewhere. You really must learn to develop a thicker skin if you want to keep up with my son." "I know, Martha. You're right, as always," I said, my voice hovering at a pitch of perfect, fragile submission. I set the tray down and sighed, letting a single, practiced tear glimmer in my eye. "I'm just so overwhelmed. Julian asked me to sign these transfer papers for the Delaware holdings, but some of the numbers, they don't make sense to me. I was hoping you could help me. You've always had such a sharp eye for the family legacy." Martha preened at the compliment. She loved being the matriarch, the keeper of the Miller fortune. She reached for the documents with a condescending pat on my hand. "It's a good thing you came to me, dear. You've always been a bit slow with the high-level math." She began to flip through the pages, her eyes scanning the columns of figures. I watched her closely, counting the seconds. I had intentionally slipped in a miscellaneous expenditure report from her own private retirement trust, the $500,000 fund that was supposed to ensure she never had to rely on anyone but herself. I saw the exact moment the blood drained from her face. Her hands stopped mid-air. Her eyes widened, darting back and forth across the line item that showed a wire transfer of $500,000 to an account titled Bella Designs LLC. "What is this?" Martha hissed, her voice trembling. "Eleanor, why is my retirement account showing a zero balance? This fund was locked. Only Julian had the secondary power of attorney for emergencies." I gasped, covering my mouth in a display of faux horror. "Oh no. Martha, I wasn't supposed to show you that page. I thought you knew. Julian said he was reinvesting your capital into a new venture. He told me it was a family decision." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But when I looked at the filings for Bella Designs, it isn't a tech firm. It's a boutique architecture studio in Carmel. It's Isabella's firm, Martha. He used your entire life savings to buy her a storefront and a fleet of luxury company cars." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear the gears in Martha's head grinding to a halt. For years, she had enabled Julian's narcissism because she thought it protected her. She had sacrificed me to keep him happy, believing her own throne was secure. Now, she was looking at the cold, hard proof that her golden boy had sold her future to pay for his mistress's vanity project. "He wouldn't," she whispered, though the way her fingers shook told a different story. "He loves me. I'm his mother. He knows I need that money for my medical care, for my security." "I'm sure there's an explanation," I said, my tone dripping with a sympathy that felt like acid. "Maybe he thought Isabella was a better investment than your comfort? You know how Julian gets when he's inspired by a new project. He probably just forgot to ask you." I reached out and gently touched the scar on my side through my dress, a subtle reminder of what I had given her. "I just hope you don't have another relapse, Martha. Without that fund and with the way Julian is spending lately, well, the best nursing homes in California don't take promises as payment. Martha looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw fear in her eyes. Not the fear of death she'd had before the surgery, but the fear of a woman who realized she had raised a predator and then handed him her own throat. She looked at the empty relic of her bank account and then back at me, the woman she had called a leech only hours ago. "Eleanor," she began, her voice cracking, "we have to do something. You have to help me talk to him." "Of course, Martha," I replied, a cold, dark satisfaction blooming in my chest as I stood up to leave. "I'll do exactly what you've always taught me to do. I'll stay quiet, keep my head down, and let the men handle the business. After all, I'm just the wife, right?" I walked away, leaving her sitting there with her cold croissants and her empty future. She was starting to realize that the empty nest wasn't just about her son leaving. It was about him stripping the nest bare on his way out. And I was just getting started. The scent of panic lingering around Martha's villa was the most refreshing thing I had breathed in years. As I walked back toward the main house, I didn't head for the kitchen or the laundry room. Instead, I went straight to my dressing room and pulled a small, velvet-lined box from a hidden floorboard beneath my vanity. Inside sat a masterpiece of deception, a replica of my mother's emerald brooch. I had commissioned it weeks ago from a master jeweler in the Diamond District who specialized in cinematic props. To the naked eye, the lab-grown stones had the same deep, mossy inclusions as the original. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly worthless, much like the marriage I was currently dismantling. The opportunity I had been waiting for arrived sooner than expected. Isabella, emboldened by her victory at the gala, and clearly high on the thrill of Martha's stolen retirement funds, had the audacity to show up at our estate later that afternoon. She claimed she was there to discuss the interior design for Julian's new Delaware office, but we both knew she was there to mark her territory. I found her in the sunroom, sipping sparkling water and admiring herself in the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was wearing the real emerald brooch again, pinned carelessly to a designer blazer that Julian had undoubtedly paid for. Seeing my mother's legacy on that woman felt like a physical assault, a cold blade twisting in my gut. But I didn't flinch. I smoothed my features into a mask of weary, defeated resignation. "Isabella," I said, my voice soft, almost trembling. "I didn't expect to see you here today." She turned, a predatory smile stretching across her face. She didn't even try to hide the brooch. "Eleanor, I heard you were resting. Julian mentioned you were feeling a bit overwhelmed after last night. It's a lot to handle, isn't it? Being part of a family that's moving so fast toward the future." "It is," I whispered, walking closer, my eyes fixed on the floor. "I actually came to apologize. For the scene at the gala, I was out of line." I looked up at her, letting my eyes go wide and watery. "And I wanted to tell you, that brooch, it looks beautiful on you. Better than it ever did on me." Isabella's ego was her greatest weakness. She preened, her hand reaching up to touch the emeralds. "Oh, this?" Martha gave it to me. She said it was a family heirloom that needed a fresher energy to carry it. "I hope you don't mind." "Of course not," I said, stepping into her personal space, acting as if I were reaching out for support. I stumbled slightly. A perfect, practiced trip. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm just a bit dizzy today." As I steadied myself, my hand moved with the precision of a card sharp. I had spent hours practicing this movement. My left hand caught her shoulder to balance me, while my right hand, shielded by the fold of my silk sleeve, moved toward the lapel of her blazer. Isabella was so focused on her own reflection and my apparent frailty that she didn't feel the ghost-light pressure of the pin being unlatched. It took exactly 3 seconds. The real brooch was palmed and slipped into my deep pocket. The fake was pinned back in its place, centered perfectly. "Are you all right?" Isabella asked, her voice dripping with mock concern as she pulled away, smoothing her blazer. She didn't even glance down. She was too busy enjoying the sight of the woman she thought she had defeated. "I'm fine," I said, straightening up, the weight of the real emerald now a warm, solid comfort in my pocket. "Just a bit of a headache. I think I'll go lie down now. Please, make yourself at home. Julian should be back soon." "I'm sure he will be," she called out as I walked away, her voice ringing with a triumph that was already obsolete. "And Eleanor? Don't worry about the office design. I've got everything under control." I didn't look back. I climbed the stairs to my office, locked the door, and pulled the real brooch from my pocket. In the natural light of the window, the emeralds glowed with a fierce, ancient fire. My mother's spirit felt closer than ever. I held the metal to my lips, the platinum cold and honest. "I got you back, Mom," I whispered. I looked down at my phone. A notification popped up from my bank's private wealth portal. The revocation of the debt guarantees had been processed. In less than 24 hours, Julian's credit lines would vanish. The Mirage holdings he was so proud of was about to hit a very real wall. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the live stream feed from Serena's TikTok account. She was currently at a high-end brunch spot, laughing with her friends about the downfall of the librarian. I watched for a moment, a cold smile touching my lips. They all thought they were the ones holding the cards. They thought they had stripped me of my dignity, my health, and my history. They had no idea that the fake Isabella was wearing was just the beginning. The real theft was about to happen in a boardroom, and this time, there would be no apologies. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the Santa Cruz Mountains, casting long, bruised shadows across the manicured lawn as I returned to Martha's villa. I found her exactly where I expected, pacing the length of her veranda, her phone pressed to her ear, her face a mask of frantic desperation. She was trying to reach Julian, but I knew he wouldn't answer. He was currently in a deep focus meeting with Marcus and Isabella, celebratory cocktails already flowing as they toasted to a Delaware empire that was, at this very moment, dissolving into thin air. Martha looked up as I approached, and for the first time, she didn't look at me with condescension. She looked at me with the hungry, sharp eyes of a drowning woman. "He's not answering, Eleanor," she snapped, tossing her phone onto the glass table. "My accounts are frozen. The bank is talking about irregularities, and my son is nowhere to be found. You're his wife. You have the power of attorney over the secondary trust. Fix this. Now." It was incredible, really. Even in the face of total financial ruin, her first instinct was to bark orders at the woman she had spent the last decade trying to diminish. She still saw me as a tool, a programmable machine designed to serve the Miller interest. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't offer a glass of water or a soft word. Instead, I sat down in the chair opposite her, smoothed my skirt, and looked at her with a terrifyingly calm expression. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Martha," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the librarian tremor she was used to. "The banks aren't listening to me anymore. In fact, they're the ones who called me. It seems Julian's little reinvestments triggered a series of red flags that even my signature can't bypass." I paused, letting the silence stretch between us until it felt heavy enough to crush. "But tell me, Martha, while we're talking about things being taken, how does it feel? To wake up and realize the person you trusted most has treated you like a disposable asset." Martha's eyes narrowed, her lip curling in a familiar sneer. She reached up, her fingers grazing the emerald brooch, the fake one I had just pinned on Isabella, which Isabella had likely already returned to Martha's vanity for safekeeping. "Don't you dare try to lecture me on betrayal, Eleanor. You've had a comfortable life because of my son's brilliance. You were a nobody from a family of janitors until we brought you into this house." She leaned forward, her voice dripping with a venom that was fueled by her own fear. "You think you're special because you gave me a kidney? Please, it was a transaction. You wanted the Miller name, and that was the price of admission. Don't act like it was some grand act of martyrdom. You did what any social climber would do to secure her spot at the table." The air in my lungs turned to ice. I had known she was ungrateful, but hearing her describe the literal sacrifice of my flesh as a transaction was the final click of the lock. Every lingering doubt I had about the severity of my revenge vanished. I looked at her, at the woman whose heart beat inside a body kept alive by my own vitality, and I felt nothing but a cold, crystalline resolve. A transaction, I repeated softly. Is that what we're calling it now? I spent 6 months in recovery, Martha. I have a scar that aches every time it rains, a permanent reminder that I chose your life over my own comfort. I gave you 5 more years to watch the sunset, to see your son grow, to breathe the California air, and you used that borrowed time to help him rob me of my mother's divut. Martha scoffed, turning her head away as if the conversation bored her. The brooch is exactly where it belongs, with people who actually have the status to wear it. Now stop being dramatic and call the bank. If my retirement fund isn't restored by morning, I'll have Julian throw you out of this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. We'll see how much that kidney is worth when you're standing on a street corner in San Jose. She truly believed she still held the leash. She truly thought that the walls of this estate were her fortress, rather than her cage. I stood up, moving with a grace and power that seemed to finally make her pause. I leaned down, my face inches from hers, and for the first time, Martha flinched. The mask of the gentle wife was gone, replaced by the strategist who had built Julian's empire from the shadows. Keep your health, Martha, I whispered, my voice a low, chilling promise. Take your vitamins, walk in the garden, and cherish every breath, because you're going to need all the strength you have to face what's coming. When the walls start falling, and they will, very soon, remember this moment. Remember that you had a daughter who loved you, and you traded her for a son who only saw you as a piggy bank. I turned and walked away without looking back, leaving her shivering in the fading light of the veranda. The trap was set, the evidence was filed, and the ghost in the machine was finally stepping into the light. The time for warnings was over. Tomorrow, the golden boy and his mother would find out exactly what happens when you try to bankrupt the woman who owns the bank. Is a mother's love blind, or is it just greedy? Julian chose money over his own mother's future. What do you think about Julian's betrayal of Martha? Drop a comment with the word loyalty if you're team me. Let's see how justice tastes. Monday morning in the financial district of San Francisco feels like a battlefield where the weapons are pens and the casualties are legacies. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Aegis building offered a panoramic view of the Bay Bridge, shrouded in a thin, expensive-looking mist. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted Arabica and the palpable, predatory ego of men who believed they had already won. Julian sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking every bit the Silicon Valley titan in a bespoke charcoal suit. Next to him was Marcus, his lead counsel and co-conspirator, and tucked in the corner, Isabella sat with a smug grin, preening like a cat that had finally caught the canary. She was wearing the fake emerald brooch, the lab-grown stones catching the light with a deceptive brilliance that matched the fraudulent nature of the deal about to take place. The wire transfer is ready to be initiated, Marcus announced, tapping a rhythm on his tablet. $50 million from the Delaware Acquisition Group. Once the final signatures are recorded, Mirage Holdings becomes the legal owner of the Aegis framework. And Julian, you're a free man with a very, very deep pocket. Julian let out a short, triumphant laugh, leaning back in his chair with a glass of scotch that was far too expensive for 10 in the morning. He didn't even look at the door when I walked in. To him, I was just a ghost haunting the halls of his success. A necessary annoyance required to sign the final spousal consent forms that would allow him to transfer the last of our marital assets into his shell company. "You're late, Eleanor," Julian said, his voice dripping with a casual, cruel indifference. He didn't offer me a seat, but I suppose we should expect that from someone who spent the weekend sulking in the guest wing. "Did you bring the pen I gave you for our anniversary? I'd love for you to use it to sign away the last of your relevance." Isabella giggled, a sharp, grating sound that echoed off the glass walls. Julian turned to the two representatives from the multinational group, men in gray suits who looked as cold as the marble floors. "Excuse my wife," he said with a wink. "She's a bit traditional. She still thinks business is about loyalty and hard work, instead of knowing when to cut the dead weight and move on to something fresher." I walked to the table, my footsteps echoing with a deliberate, steady rhythm. I didn't look hurt. I didn't look like the woman who had been humiliated at the gala. I looked like a woman who was precisely where she was supposed to be. I saw Julian's phone on the table, lighting up incessantly with "Mom" flashing on the screen. He glanced at it, rolled his eyes, and swiped the call into oblivion. "She's probably calling to complain about her bank app again," he muttered to Marcus. "I'll deal with her after the wire clears. I'm not letting her midlife crisis ruin my $50 million morning." He had no idea that his mother was currently sitting in a darkened villa, watching her world evaporate, or that he was the one who had turned off the lights. "The documents, Julian," I said softly, standing over him. I looked down at the spousal consent and asset transfer form. It was a masterpiece of legal theft. It effectively transferred every patent, every contract, and every cent of the Aegis Empire into Mirage Holdings, a company I was supposedly consenting to be excluded from. Julian shoved a Mont Blanc pen toward me, his eyes burning with an impatient greed. He was already dreaming of the private jet, the villa in Cabo, and a life where the woman who had saved his mother and his company was nothing but a footnote in a divorce filing. "Just sign it, Elle," he urged, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. "Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to negotiate. You're out of your league. If you sign this now, I might even be generous enough to let you keep the Atherton house for a few months, while you find a nice, quiet apartment in the East Bay. Somewhere more your speed." Marcus cleared his throat, pushing the tablet forward. "The multinational group is waiting, Eleanor. We have a deadline for the wire. Let's not make this difficult." I picked up the pen, feeling the weight of it in my hand. I looked at the gray-suited men across the table, then at Isabella, who was touching the fake brooch with a proprietary air. Finally, I looked at Julian. He looked so confident, so sure of his own brilliance. He truly believed that because he was the face of the company, he was the owner of the soul. He thought he was selling a gold mine to these investors. He didn't realize he was trying to sell a bridge he didn't own, using a map I had redrawn in the middle of the night. "You're right, Julian," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face, a smile that finally made him pause, the scotch freezing halfway to his lips. "Tonight is about brilliance, and about knowing exactly what a leech looks like when it's finally pulled off the skin." I didn't sign the paper. Instead, I pulled a heavy, blue-bound folder from my briefcase and slammed it onto the mahogany table. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Before we proceed with the sale of Mirage Holdings," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority that turned the room to ice, "I think the investors would be very interested to see the original filing for the Aegis patents. Because according to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, Julian, you don't own the technology you're trying to sell. I do." The air left the room. Julian's face went from a triumphant flush to a sickly, pale gray. Marcus scrambled for his tablet, his fingers fumbling. "That's impossible," Julian stammered, his bravado crumbling like wet sand. "I'm the CEO. I'm the founder." "You're the face, Julian," I replied, leaning in until we were eye to eye. "But I'm the one who laid every brick, and I just pulled the foundation out from under your feet." The silence that followed was so thick you could hear the hum of the HVAC system struggling to cool the room. Marcus, the man who prided himself on being the smartest shark in the water, looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His hands shook as he grabbed the blue folder, tearing through the pages of the EM Legacy Trust. Julian, meanwhile, sat paralyzed, his scotch glass still hovering near his mouth, his face a grotesque shade of ash and sweat. "This is a lie," Julian finally choked out, the words sounding like a death rattle. "I founded Aegis. I'm the inventor. My name is on the front of the building, Eleanor." "Your name is on the lobby wall, Julian, but my name is on the soul of the company, I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a winter morning in the Sierras. I leaned back, crossing my arms, watching him unravel. Do you remember the 2018 liquidity crisis? You were 3 days away from a total collapse. You were crying in our kitchen, terrified that the golden boy was about to become a cautionary tale. I used my father's inheritance to bail you out. I saved your reputation, your ego, and your company. I pointed a steady finger at the bottom of page 12. But I wasn't being a loyal little wife back then, Julian. I was being a businesswoman. In exchange for that infusion of capital, you signed a transfer of all current and future intellectual property into the EM Legacy Trust. You didn't read the fine print because you were too busy looking at yourself in the mirror, relieved that you didn't have to sell your Ferrari. You thought it was a formality. I knew it was an insurance policy against exactly this moment. The two lead investors from the multinational group, who had been watching the drama with clinical detachment, suddenly closed their laptops in perfect unison. Mr. Miller, the senior representative said, his voice devoid of any warmth. We are here to buy the Aegis framework technology. If you do not own the patents, you have nothing to sell. In fact, you have just attempted to negotiate a $50 million deal using assets that do not belong to you. In our world, that's called securities fraud. Julian turned toward me, his eyes wide with a desperate animalistic panic. The arrogance that had fueled him at the gala, the cruelty he had shown Martha, the smugness he had shared with Isabella, it all evaporated in an instant. Eleanor, honey, he stammered, trying to find that old manipulative charm. We're a team. This is just a misunderstanding. Tell them we're together on this. We can still sign. Think of the 50 million. We can start over. Just you and me. I'll make it up to you, I swear. Isabella let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to the fake emerald on her chest. She wasn't looking at Julian with love anymore. She was looking at him like he was a sinking ship she had accidentally boarded. Julian, what are you saying? She hissed. I didn't even acknowledge her. I kept my eyes on my husband. There is no you and me, Julian. There is only a creditor and a debtor. You wanted to cut the dead weight? Well, here I am. And it turns out, I'm the only thing that was keeping you afloat. I stood up, gathering my things with a slow, deliberate grace. The power in the room had shifted so completely that the air felt different, thinner, colder. Julian was no longer the titan of Silicon Valley. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, and I had my foot on the lever. The deal is dead, I told the investors. They nodded, stood up, and walked out without a second glance at the man they were about to make a billionaire. The doors clicked shut, leaving us in a heavy, suffocating silence. Julian stared at the empty seats, then at the folder, and finally at me. He looked small. For the first time in 10 years, he looked exactly like the man he actually was, a fraud. What do you want? He whispered, his voice cracking. I want the truth, Julian, I said, leaning over the table one last time. And I'm going to make sure the whole world hears it. Julian collapsed into the leather chair, his head in his hands. The silence of the boardroom was now deafening, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic tapping of my nails on the mahogany table. Isabella stood by the window, her back to us, her silhouette trembling. She was smart enough to realize that a man who doesn't own his own company is just a man with a very expensive haircut and a lot of debt. Julian looked up, his eyes bloodshot and pleading, the mask of the Silicon Valley visionary completely shattered. Eleanor, please, he croaked. You can't do this. If the deal falls through, I'm bankrupt. The personal guarantees. The banks will take everything. They'll take the Atherton house. They'll take Martha's villa. They'll take my cars. I'll have nothing. I didn't offer a tissue. I didn't offer a hug. I pulled a single pre-signed check from my blazer pocket and slid it across the table. It was for $1 million. To a man who had just lost $50 million, it was an insult. To a man who was about to lose his freedom, it was a lifeline. This is your exit, Julian, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. $1 million. It's enough for you to disappear, to start some quiet life in a country without an extradition treaty, or to hire a decent lawyer who might keep you in a minimum security facility. Julian's eyes locked onto the check with a sickening hunger. What's the catch? The catch is the truth, I said, sliding a second document toward him. This is a full confession. You will admit to embezzling funds from the Aegis Employee Pension Fund to finance Mirage Holdings. You will admit to forging my signature on the initial Delaware filings. And you will formally renounce any claim to the EM Legacy Trust or your mother's remaining assets. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. But here is the real choice, Julian. That $1 million is all that's left. You can sign this, take the money and run. But if you do, there's nothing left for Martha. No medical care, no villa, no staff. You take the money, and your mother goes to a state-funded facility. You save yourself, or you save her. Choose. Julian didn't even blink. He didn't ask about his mother's health or where she would sleep tomorrow. He didn't mention the kidney I had given her. He reached for the pen with a desperation that was almost pathetic. She's lived her life, Elle, he muttered, his voice cold and frantic. She's the one who kept pushing me to optimize the accounts anyway. She's a bitter old drain on my resources. If I stay here to save her, we both drown. If I take the money, at least one of us survives. He looked at the check again, a twisted, manic grin forming on his face. Besides, she was never that fond of you. Why should I sacrifice my future for a woman who would have replaced me in a heartbeat if I wasn't successful? So, you're choosing the $1 million? I asked, gesturing toward the tablet I had placed on the table earlier, its screen dark. You're admitting you stole from your own employees and your own mother, and you're leaving her to rot just so you can keep your head above water? Yes, Julian barked, scribbling his signature onto the confession with trembling hands. I'm choosing me. I've always chosen me. That's how you win in this town, Eleanor. You're too soft. You think loyalty matters? Look at you. You're sitting here with patents and no husband. I'm sitting here with $1 million and a head start. Martha was right about one thing. You're a librarian playing at being a queen. I'll be in Cabo by midnight while you're stuck here filing paperwork for a family that hates you. I waited until the ink was dry. Then I reached out and tapped the screen of the tablet. The display flickered to life, revealing a TikTok Live interface. The viewer count was sitting at 85,000. In the top corner, a small window showed Serena's profile. But it wasn't Serena's face on the screen. It was Martha's. She was sitting in her villa, her face pale and streaked with tears, her hand clutching her chest right over the spot where her surgical scar lay. I had set up a private link for her to watch the negotiation, and Serena, ever the opportunist, had accidentally, or perhaps vengefully, leaked the stream to her entire following when she realized the ship was sinking. The entire world had just heard Julian call his mother a bitter old drain, and watched him trade her life for $1 million check. Julian, Martha's voice came through the tablet speakers, thin and broken. I gave you everything. I lied for you. I protected you. And you sold me for $1 million? Julian froze. He looked at the tablet, then at me, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. Mom, it's not what it sounds like. I was just... The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a bang. 4 men in dark windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in yellow across the back stepped into the room. Behind them stood 2 uniformed San Francisco police officers. Marcus, the lawyer, immediately put his hands up, backing away from the table like it was on fire. Julian Miller, the lead agent said, his voice echoing in the hollow room. You're under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement of pension funds, and multiple counts of identity theft. We have the confession you just signed, and thanks to the live stream, we have your verbal admission of guilt. As the officers moved in to cuff him, Julian began to scream. He looked at me, his face twisted in a mask of pure, impotent rage. You set me up. You set this whole thing up. I stood up, adjusting my blazer, and looked down at him. I didn't set you up, Julian. I just gave you a choice. You're the one who picked the money over the people who loved you. You were the architect of your own ruin. I just made sure the world got to see the blueprint." As they dragged him toward the door, I turned to Isabella. She was frantically unpinning the fake emerald brooch from her blazer, her hands shaking so hard she dropped it. It clattered onto the marble floor, the lab-grown stones dull and lifeless in the harsh office lighting. "You can keep that," I said, walking past her. "It's as real as anything else in this room." I walked out of the boardroom, the sound of Julian's protests fading behind me. The golden boy was gone. The queen mother was broken. And the leech? She was finally walking into the sun. The silence of my new penthouse was different from the silence of the mansion in Atherton. This wasn't a silence filled with heavy secrets, or the echoing footsteps of a man who looked through me as if I were a pane of glass. This was the silence of peace, the quiet hum of a life reclaimed. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the San Francisco skyline as the twilight painted the city in shades of violet and gold. The Bay Bridge stretched across the water like a string of diamonds, a marvel of engineering and resilience, much like the woman I had become. In my hand, I held a glass of mineral water, clear and refreshing, a far cry from the blood-red wine that had once stained my dignity. I wasn't just surviving. For the first time in 10 years, I was breathing. The news had been relentless for the past few weeks. "The Golden Boy's lead feat," one headline had screamed, detailing Julian's spectacular fall from grace. He was currently trading his bespoke suits for a standard-issue jumpsuit, while his legal team scrambled to navigate a mountain of evidence they couldn't possibly climb. Marcus had already turned state's evidence, trading Julian's secrets for a reduced sentence, proving that in a world built on greed, there is no such thing as loyalty. Isabella had disappeared into the shadows of the Central Valley, her architecture career over before it began, leaving behind only the dull, fake emerald brooch that now sat in a police evidence locker as a symbol of her own shallow ambitions. But it was Martha's fate that lingered in the back of my mind. Following the seizure of Julian's assets, the villa had been sold to cover the pension fund debts he had created. I had seen a photo of her recently, taken by a local reporter. She was living in a modest, one-bedroom rental in a quiet part of San Jose, far from the country clubs and the gala ballrooms. Every morning, as she dresses herself in the mirror of that small bathroom, she has to look at the long, jagged scar on her side. It is no longer a symbol of our shared bond. It is a permanent reminder of the daughter she traded for a son who didn't even care if she had a bed to sleep in. She is healthy, yes. I ensured she would have enough for her basic medical needs out of a sense of moral duty. But she is profoundly alone. The bitter irony is that she finally has the quiet life she always claimed I was suited for, and she hates every second of it. I looked down at the lapel of my cream silk blouse. Pinned there was the real emerald brooch. It caught the light, glowing with a deep ancestral fire that seemed to pulse with my own heartbeat. It was home, where it belonged, a testament to a woman who had worked until her hands were raw to ensure her legacy would survive. I had preserved my mother's history, and in doing so, I had secured my own. The Aegis patents were now the foundation of a new firm, one built on transparency, ethics, and the hard-earned respect of the people who actually did the work. My bank account was full, but my spirit was fuller. I had learned that you cannot buy the kind of peace that comes from knowing you stood your ground when the world told you to kneel. As the stars began to poke through the California fog, I felt a sense of profound clarity. The American dream isn't just about the wealth you accumulate or the buildings you put your name on. It's about the integrity you keep when the storms come. I had been tested, stripped down to nothing but my own self-reliance, and I had come out stronger. I was no longer the shadow, the librarian, or the leech. I was the architect. I had built a new life from the ruins of the old one, and this time, the foundation was made of something Julian could never touch, my own unshakable worth. I stepped away from the window and turned off the lights, leaving the city glow to illuminate the room. There was no more DN kit, no more masks to wear. I walked toward my bedroom, the real emerald shimmering in the dark. I had given a part of myself to save a family that didn't deserve it, but in the end, I had saved the only person who truly mattered. I had saved me. And as I closed my eyes, I knew that the best chapters of my story were still waiting to be written. Don't ever mistake kindness for weakness. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who's already figured out how to take the whole house down. If my journey inspired you to reclaim your own power, subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Remember, your value isn't decided by those who fail to see it. It's decided by you. Stay strong, stay sharp, and never let them see you sweat. What would you have done in my shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of strength and survival. Thank you for listening.